as hard as it may be to reintegrate him, if he's really disappointed and has his heart set on moving to Liverpool, if he's causing problems within the squad, which we don't know that he is, we just know that he's training separately from that, and clearly...
So they're now seeming to say that Alexander Isak is going to be kept at the club, that they won't sell him. What do you make of the situation overall here, from both the club's perspective and the players' perspective?
It's really difficult, isn't it? I feel so sorry for Newcastle, because it was such a feel-good season last year, winning the trophy, and I just felt if they keep all of their key players and then they add to those key players. But the fact now it's they've been in, I know they've brought in Elanga, but they've been in for other players and it's not quite worked out. They've then obviously, the Isak situation, obviously wanted to keep him, because ideally I think Eddie Howe would want him and another striker. So if he does go, you're then looking for two strikers, and it's a lot of uncertainty. And I think what Eddie Howe's been brilliant at is having a real sort of cohesive squad, a real squad that's together. So I think, if that's causing any sort of, I'm not saying a rift within the camp, but just a bit of uncertainty within the camp, that's not what he would want. So I think from a club's perspective, they probably just want clarity. If he's going to go, then he needs to go, and they need to bring in two strikers pretty quickly, because they're relying on one young forward. I know the likes of Anthony Gordon could potentially play there, but ideally that's what he would want to do. So making that business and making it happen pretty quickly is going to be quite tough. And then from a player's perspective, again, you just want it done, don't you? You just want to know where you're going to be next season. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's been a real saga, hasn't it, over this transfer window, and I feel like it's just going to continue.
I was going to say, you get the feeling the saga's not finished yet at all. Obviously there's reports saying that Newcastle are saying he won't be sold.
Yeah.
If he's not sold, how hard is it to reintegrate a player when he's kind of knowingly unhappy with the situation?
I think, from a player's perspective, if I was in that dressing room and, and Isak came back, I think I'd just be happy that he was there, because I'd think, well, he's a top quality striker. We saw what he's done in the Premier League. He can win games for us. So I think, it maybe initially a little bit awkward, but I think you'd sort of, you'd welcome him in the end. But I think from a fan's perspective, you see a player wanting to leave, it's probably quite difficult at first to accept him then coming back in. But again, if he starts scoring the goals and assisting, then it's quickly forgotten. Of course it is. But yeah, at the moment it's just a bit of an awkward situation. You want a player that wants to be there and wants to play for the football club. So I think that's what Eddie Howe will be thinking. We want him to be here. We want him to be performing at the levels that he was last year.
And we're talking lots of ifs here. You mentioned before that if he did end up going, they might need a couple of players that they might need to bring in. Where do you think Newcastle could look though for those players?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I know he's obviously Newcastle have been linked with Wissa, but again, Brentford are probably looking at that thinking, we've lost a lot of key players. We've lost goals in Mbeumo, Norgard, our captain, our leader. Do you really, manager, so then do you really want to go and lose another key performer? So they'll be trying to get as much money for him as they possibly can. And we know that Brentford are very good at recruiting and bringing in other players to replace them, but they are big players to try and replace. But he would be great, he would fit straight in, like say Premier League ready. And then I know there's a couple of other options that they've been looking at, but ideally, Eddie Howe at the start of the season would have wanted Isak and another, and then obviously the younger Sula as a player that can come in and show his potential as and when, but you don't want to rely too heavy on a young player with a lot of potential.
And sometimes when we talk about transfer windows, we look at kind of whether they're successful in terms of the players that they've brought in, but actually will Newcastle see this as a success if they keep hold of Isak?
Probably, yeah, and it was interesting because I was listening to Eddie Howe talking, and he was saying you obviously look at a transfer window at the end of the window and you say, well, we'll give that team a 10 because they've brought in all of these players, we'll give them a 1 because they haven't brought anyone in. But sometimes it is, we know that Eddie Howe's very good at working with what he's got and developing players and improving them. So he'll certainly be, whatever happens, whether Isak goes or doesn't, he'll work with the team that he's got and he'll get the best out of that team. But of course, if they could keep hold of, obviously Bruno Guimaraes, you want to keep hold of him, Joe Linton, Anthony Gordon. Isak is a key player that we all know is linked, to a lot of clubs. And yeah, if they could keep hold of him, you probably would say that was a success. If they could then bring in Wissa as well. So we'll only know, won't we, when the end of the transfer window comes in, if it's going to be a success or not.
And where does this situation leave Liverpool? Because it's a player that Liverpool obviously wants. Yeah. Where does it leave them if they don't get him?
Well, Liverpool have done brilliant business, haven't they? I think when you look at the players that they've brought in, quality. And the only side where I've maybe heard a couple of people say, well, how long is it going to take for them to gel? But Arne Slot's used to gelling players. He's used to doing that in previous clubs that he's been at. So to have that sort of turnover and have the players coming in, I think it'd be absolutely fine. But of course, if you then add Isak to that attacking lineup, Liverpool's certainly the team to beat. And I think the other area that Liverpool fans are maybe looking at is, do we need another centre-back? So that would maybe be something that they could be looking at. But to add Isak to what they've already got, the rest of the teams need to look out, don't they?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. Sue, we'll get you to put your Everton hat on just for a moment, because we were chatting to Peter Stevenson outside the new stadium just a little bit earlier. New stadium, full capacity it looks like today for that pre-season game against Roma. Does this feel like a big moment for the club, finally getting to open up the stadium to the fans?
It does, yeah. It's been something that, I've sort of been to the new stadium, said my goodbyes to Goodison Park. Obviously, it's still going to stay there with the women playing there. But yeah, it does. It feels like a new sort of fresh start for Everton, if you like. They've had a lot of years where we've been struggling and we've been fighting relegation and thinking what's going to happen, are they going to go down, playing in a new stadium in the Championship. They've managed to stay in the league under David Moyes. I was a little bit concerned when David Moyes said we needed 10 players, but the fact that they're starting to bring in now, they're starting to bring in players and bringing in that business linked with a lot of other players as well, which will be very exciting for Everton fans if they could get those over the line. So yeah, still more to be done, because it was a difficult situation where a lot of players were out of contract. We had some loan players that went out, so yeah, it was a big turnover, but David Moyes has got so much experience that he'd be able to handle that, I'm sure. But yeah, the new stadium, I think, really exciting for a lot of fans.
The campaign for all these clubs, it's going to be relentless. And when Newcastle did get in the Champions League last time, their league form suffered, and that season they missed out on Europe. So it's going to be relentless for clubs like Newcastle, so they're going to need more. Visser clearly wants to go to the football club, and then they need one more, that's striker.
We talk about Newcastle United shopping in the same market as some of these other big clubs. Not only clubs who are in the Champions League, but as we've seen this week, clubs like Manchester United, who may have finished 15th, but there is still that pull of Manchester United. We've heard that Shesko only wanted to go to Manchester United. So it wasn't anything to do with Newcastle. It wasn't a case of snubbing Newcastle, but it was a case of wanting to play for Manchester United. But what Newcastle have got at the moment is a bit of an uncertain structure, if you like, because no sporting director, no chief executive. How much can that add to the uncertainty, and for players who are wanting to join a club thinking, actually, is everything fine at this football club or not?
But you've got to get the right sporting director as well, don't you? Because when Dan Ashworth was there, it looked like he'd signed some really good players. Then you hear about Alexander Isak maybe being unhappy last season about not getting a contract extension. And we look at the